we started with the courage of truth, and we will end with the courage of lie. In order to understand the relationship between philosophy and lie, not in a moral way. I don't want to blame anyone, anything. I'm not on this level. I just want to understand the yes, the way, you know, claiming for the truth is something complex, and it's connected to a way of lying. But there is interesting functions of lying. Going back to this connection between logos and pathos, I would like to say that with Nietzsche, that's claiming for the truth is a kind of madness, because that's a sort of pathologic illusion. It's a delusion. It's in some way, it's a toxic fiction, because telling the truth and imposing the truth, it's a way to give a sort of poison in the name of a medicine. It's to contaminate the interlocutors and to make them believe that they would get something like a medicine, that they will feel better. But according to Nietzsche, that's the opposite. That's to make them believe that they are sick, and as I told you, the cure, that's the poison. So, of course, Nietzsche's critique was against Plato and his idea of the truth. But you remember that Foucault didn't follow at this time Nietzsche. I mean, he didn't separate the philosopher before Socrates and Socrates himself and Plato. So he wanted to underline this idea of the truth, the courage of the truth, as a stoic manner or a cynic attitude, and so we have to remember that during the 70s, many philosophers like Deleuze, Derrida, Lyotard, Foucault, and I forget someone. Anyway, because there were so many symposiums about Nietzsche. It was really a Nietzschean turn in the 70s, you know. And a special also symposium in Cerisy-Lassar, a place in France, to discuss about this turn, this genealogical turn. And the critique was that the fact that the sophist, in fact, was Plato and Socrates, by this idea of the truth, and especially, it's difficult to translate this idea by Plato that there is something unique from the human beings, something peculiar. We say in French, le propre de, you know, le propre, for example, the unique of human, or the peculiar of human.
Your own.
Your own, yes.
Yeah, like you can say your own house.
Like property?
Yes. That's not the property. That's not a property. That's the fact that, well, you are two. You are human is two. Human beings are two.
It can be like proper to something, or
you say property.
Own something. Yeah, well, it's both. It's like proper to someone, but it's like your own something as well.
Like self-esteem is l'amour propre.
Understood. There was a very interesting book written by Jean-Marie Benoit in the 70s, so-called La tyrannie du propre. That the fact that this property is the tyranny, you know. So it's a way to reverse the proposition. The fact that, of course, Plato fight against the tyrant, but no, that was the tyranny of philosophy, to affirm, to promote this idea of the peculiar of property of human beings. And you remember that Foucault tried to distinguish different qualities of the truth, what is not hidden, the aletheia in Greek word, aletheia, without any concealment. What is not confused or altered by something else, what is straight and what is unmovable. So the true life, according to Plato and then commented by Foucault, it's a life without shade, without mixing, with the straight attitude and without any movement. So this morning I was quoting Freud regarding this desire for truth and this way of questioning this desire for truth. So now let me just say that for Freud there is also a function of lie in philosophy, or the lie of the theoretical discourse in philosophy, used by philosophy. And this function is the repression of the subject declaring the truth. So that means that the function, well, the lie is the way, you know, the philosopher hides his or her own personal interests behind the abstract language. Because what surprised Freud is this contradiction or contrast between the requirements for an anonymity in the philosophical discourse. Because when a writer, you know, when you have a novelist or a poet or an artist, you know, accepts to expose himself or herself in the work of art, in paintings or in the, but usually, you know, you remember this sentence by Pascal, you know, the ego is hateful. You have to hate any ego in philosophy. You have to get rid of any ego, any self. You just have to reach the universal language, the abstract world, without any personal interest. So it's amazing for Freud to see that when you talk about philosophy, you talk about philosophers. For example, you talk about Hegel or Descartes. So that's not anonymous at all, you know. And you designate this philosophical system by the name of the philosopher. So there's really a contradiction. So that's why there is yes, two contradictory demands: a demand for universality and then anonymity, and also a hidden requirement to become to impose the name of the philosopher. So this contrast, this contradiction between this radical objectivity and then the personal interest of the philosopher testify of this kind of lie, because there is an over-determination of the personality of the philosopher, which puts him or her on the side of the artist, but the language is not at all this of art. So psychoanalysis is interesting in discovering the subjective motivation and the individual motivation in the philosophical system, in the process of the building of the abstract language. So That's the status of the sublimation in philosophy, the conceptual symbolization. I told you this morning. And Freud is, well, he's asking, well, is it a good mediation? Because, well, of course, there was this very aggressive and provocative sentence against philosophy, especially in this lecture about the Weltanschauung, and especially with this will to well, this the way Freud wanted to say that psychoanalysis has nothing to do with the Weltanschauung, and that it's just a Naturwissenschaft. Psychoanalysis is supposed to be on the side of the natural sciences, according to this lecture. So, in spite of this very aggressive attack against philosophy, Freud is wondering if, well, since I told you that he considered that philosophy is the most convenient way to express sexuality, repressed sexuality. But is it a good mediation, this conceptual symbolic? Is it successful? I mean, the concept could have, well, could be very helpful to get this necessary sublimation in comparison with art. So there is no upper level. There is no. I mean, you would say, well, art is better than philosophy, but regarding the way of expressing or subliming, you know, the drives, what's the best, the concept or the art? So that's a discussion in different texts by Freud, but of course he considers that it's the waste of intelligence. And well, the problem is that the main problem for Freud is that philosophy denies the subconscious, and well, perhaps you remember this sentences by Sartre, you know, claiming that for the fact that, well, he said that he has no subconscious. You know? He said, no, I don't believe in subconscious, and I have no subconscious. You know? I have no superego. I'm just the self. You know. Well, of course, the self is not the ego, but yeah, there is always a kind of resistance, and it's interesting because as soon as you resist, it means that there is something difficult for you. You know. So it's well. So this resistance of philosophy regarding psychoanalysis is very, very revealing. It reveals something about philosophy. So that's a kind of neurotic attitude, sort of the way, you know, philosophers feel aggressive, attacked by psychoanalysis. So, and what is also interesting, and that's also a philosophical question, imported by Freud, is the idea of universality. Because what is also questioned by Freud is the lie of the universal. Universal is a lie because, and it's not only Freud who said that. You know, for example, Marx said that well, this social class which pretends to be the universal humanity, you know, it's the bourgeoisie. You know, bourgeoisie doesn't want to recognize its position in the society. So, in order to avoid to think of itself as the dominant position, you know, bourgeoisie is saying that well, the law, the moral, the ethics, the rights, or well, that's universal. That's, well, Marx say no, there is no universality at all. That's the ethics is always the ethics from the dominant class. So I mean that Freud is in the same stream to refuse this idea of universality. In the same way, also Lévi-Strauss. Lévi-Strauss also said that there is this ethnocentric population who claim for the universality, but that's the universality of the Western culture, of course. So it's well known, and I just want to say that just in philosophy, it's very rare that you could find someone who accepts to get rid of this requirement for universal discourse. And that's always the same problem. I mean, the need for unification thanks to the concept, this Kantian schematicism, you know, gathering the sensibility and reaching the abstract concepts, and also the universal. And what is interesting also that even I would say that some relativist philosophers are still dealing with the question of universal. Well, they say, well, there are different ways to reach the universal, but different ways. Okay, different ways. Okay, but still, there is still this notion of universal, and universal that versus to go towards the unique, unus, universal, and well, you have just perhaps some marginal thinkers who try to put on the table this idea of, you say diversal?
Diversity.
Diversity, but it's just a joke between, that's not universal, but diversal, going to the diverse. There is no universal. So universal would be one of the most famous lies in philosophy. So I would like to interrogate the definition of lie in philosophy, and I will go back to Nietzsche, especially because Nietzsche wrote a lot about philosophy as the art of dissimulation. And we were talking about the language, and you probably know this critique by Nietzsche about the language of philosophy, this conceptual language, and these relationships between metaphors and concepts in philosophy. And perhaps it's in you say Manichaean, or with this so simple imposition, but that's Nietzsche exposed the problem, but he said that, well, you had poetry, you had the tragedy in the ancient Greece, and so the way, you know, philosopher wanted to impose the concept is a way to repress all this sensibility, this you know, this morning I told you that Aristotle accepted the idea of metaphors as, you know, as intuition of the category of being. Okay, there is this sentence in Poetics saying constructing good metaphors is seeing, observing the similitude. So you can understand the similitude thanks to the metaphors. Of course, that's not enough, and we need the concepts to understand the analogies between the categories of being. But Anyway, according to Nietzsche, the metaphors keep the richness of the world, the sensibility of the world. You know? Talking about different beings, different livings. You know, that's so important, and to get rid of them in order to reach an abstract concept, that's to get rid of all this richness. And he argued that in fact that's because philosophers cannot accept the life as it is, and they're not able to live fully in the real life, that they want to persuade the others that they have to use of this very poor language, the abstract language. So it's a sort of promotion of poetry, and you know that, of course, at the end of his life he wrote this great poem, Also sprach Zarathustra. That's the comeback of this language. So, for Nietzsche, according to Nietzsche, the request for the language of truth is a declaration of hostility against the world, and that's the pathos of the truth, according to Nietzsche.
Could you say that one more time? Sorry.
Hostility. Hostility against the world. You know, the requirements for the truth and the language of truth as an abstract language is a sort of declaration of war and hostility against the world. Yeah. Yes.
Do you mean that in terms of the will to power, in terms of like the will to figuration?
Instinct, strength, the life as it is.
I've always thought of it more in terms of like asserting a modality of power over a world, an enigmatic situation, in the ability to assert power over it. But you're saying it's hostile.
You mean that the abstract language would be a kind of appropriation of the world?
Exactly.
Yeah.
A way in which we can assert mastery and power over a situation that is hostile to us.
I think that I wouldn't say that, because for Nietzsche, that's the power of of weak people, you know, of the weakness, you know, and the weak, you know, the weak people want to convince the other to that weakness is all, you know, and that they have to get rid of their power, to accept for example, the idea of right, of law. You know, so this sentence by this kind of aphorism so about rights, no, about duties. Duties are the rights the others impose to you. You know, there is no moral duties. There is no ethics about duties.
I think
it's just a question of.
I think it's truth is lie according to fixed convention.
Sorry?
Truth is lie according to fixed convention.
Yes.
That's the line in Nietzsche.
Yes. But I said that you know, the notion of duty, of moral duties. You know? You want always to show that there is always an interest. You know, we say that Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud, you know, they were the trio of the suspicion. Yeah? And in a way, you know, that's always funny, the way, you know, philosophers are taking a position regarding a trio. You know? So it's this very famous trio Nietzsche, Marx, and Freud, the suspicion.
Aristotle, Plato, Socrates.
Yeah. But also, it's interesting how some want to get rid of one or remove one of them. For example, Badiou hates Nietzsche, of course he's Platonic philosopher, so say, well, that's Marx, Freud, and Darwin.
I think that's
science. That's the good trio for So, anyway, or, later, Marx, Marcuse, and Mao. The 3M. Like kind of trios. Anyway, perhaps you have some question about the language, metaphors or concepts, or the relationship between metaphors and concepts. There's a famous also discussion in the margins of philosophy by Derrida. This question of metaphor and concept, because Derrida wanted to go further this critiques by Nietzsche, and he tried to show that, in fact, there is still a metaphysical distinction in this Nietzschean critique, because Nietzsche keeps, he keeps the distinction between metaphor and concept, and according to Derrida,
the binary.
Yeah, that's binary, and in fact, there is never a pure concept. There is always a metaphor and a concept. So that means that, well, it's not useful to distinguish the concept and metaphors. You have to get rid of the opposition itself. So it's a radicalization of this question. Now, I would like to stress another lie in philosophy, underlined by Nietzsche, is, in fact, the optimism, which is the, you say, incurable disease of philosophy? Incurable disease of philosophy. Optimism. Optimism, that's also connected to the healing, the cure. This ability to recover from illness, but it's supposed to, first of all, to persuade the others that life is illness. So that's still the critique against Socrates, but also a critique against Hegel and the Aufhebung, critique of all philosophers, of the philosophy of history, of the idea of the progress. So we have perhaps to make a break to understand the function of this lie. Why philosophy always wants to, even if it's not in the name of in this stupid name of optimism, but want to always to promote the idea of reaching another step, and yes, reaching this kind of heaven, sort of paradise. It's always a sort of motivation in the philosophical discourse. So I would like us to discuss a bit about that. And I think that perhaps now, today, there is a new name for that, a very fashion name, the name of resilience, the possibility of recovering. And so, the courage for Nietzsche would be to face the life as it is, not hoping for something else, for another world, or even in this world, something better. That's optimism. So, is it one of the functions of philosophy to make us hoping something better, some progress, some resilience? I would like us to discuss about this question with you, and also in a psychoanalytic way, this question of resilience. Yes, Michelle.
It's interesting. We cut to this immediately. I thought of the Industrial Revolution and this idea of progress, forward-moving progress, in the way that we've seen the world grow, and that has been just the general idea of just general acceptance of growth in general. Now, growth has become our problem in the world, and we're starting to recognize that. And hearing Zizek speak the other night about how we're starting to not have any more answers, and things are just, the shadows are sort of playing themselves out, is interesting to me. And this idea of staring, I guess I'm not 100% sure what you're saying, but this idea of staring the lie in the face, or staring things in the face, seems like the solution to me. That seems like the remedy, looking the evil demon and just whatever has been the cause of it, of this progress, of this continuous growth, in many ways. And that seems like the remedy of sorts. But what, I guess, I wanted to ask you, what were you saying specifically that Nietzsche said?
In a way, that's also connected with this question of the progress of medicine, progress of techniques, and also, of course, there is. We can't deny that there are many progress, but the question is the meaning of life, and this idea of accepting the life as it is, and the fact that, according to Nietzsche, but also to Freud, one of the prejudices of the philosophy and of the religion is to promote this idea of getting something better. That's if you do some exercise, if you accept to the dialectic, you will reach the good. Even with Socrates, that's the meaning of the dialectic. That's a meiotic, it's a kind of deliverance, to declare the truth and to get to this better world. So in a way, that's a kind of optimism, and perhaps it's one of the functions of philosophy and religion to keep any hope, on the table. Still.
I think it seems the play of concepts at work here, and what seems to be fundamentally at stake, is the relationship between the will to knowledge and the will to power. So that acts in a few very fundamental ways. First of all, the will to power is also referred to as the will to metaphorosity, and that results in processes of figuration. So thereby we get the movement of history, and insofar as almost, I don't want to say ideologically, but discursively, we look at that movement of history through the lens of our modes of valuing truth, which is optimism. We see that as progress, which is a lie that we tell ourselves. But there's so many more interplays between the two. when we can look at the history of power relations themselves and see how they become implicated in defining truth in these ways. So for instance, in small, like I said before, I see the world as completely fragmented, and the way that we put our concepts together are based on this will to metaphorosity, right? And he gives the concept, Nietzsche gives the concept of a leaf. We see a leaf. Oh no, that's identical cases. It was a sound stimulus. He hears something, and then that sound becomes a word. First order of simulation, second order of stimulus. So these are all lies that we're telling ourselves. The question is how that becomes sort of crystallized in history, and that happens through power relations. So ultimately, the only point that I'm making is in assessing how our modes of valuing that which constitutes truth, we have to take into consideration the relationship between the will to knowledge and will to power. And that seems to be able to account for the both why we see history as teleology and why we see truth as an ideal form, both in terms of how power operates and the figuration of philosophy itself.
But doesn't that require that the will to power would be exactly synonymous with life, in a sense?
Well, I think that's an argument that Nietzsche will make. The will to power is based on the absolute. Well, it depends how we're talking about the will to power. If we're talking about the acceptance of the will to power, it becomes an avowal of life. He talks about, the way I see it, is will to power represents sort of an energy. It's not a metaphysics, but an energetics of how things seem to operate. So it's hard to say if it's life. It's life affirming in certain passages in Nietzsche, but and it's implicated in life's processes, like the way that we differentiate objects and how we give them particular meanings.
I think you're talking about a different class, because I thought we were talking about optimism. I have no idea what you're talking about.
That's how optimism, what I just said is how optimism becomes ingrained in philosophy. And these are two concepts that Nietzsche uses, the will to knowledge and will to power. So I'm saying if you want to understand why teleology and optimism...
I have no idea what that means.
Progression, historical progression. If you want to understand why we believe that history moves toward a goal-oriented end, and you want to understand why optimism is embedded in philosophical history, you have to look at how power has operated through history, and how the will to knowledge functions as a mode of figuration.
So, teleology is, of course, something connected with the philosophy of history and also religion. The fact that there is something like a salut, the safe world at the end. So, or a messiah, or
a goal, some kind of goal.
Goals, different goals in philosophy, the kind of fate of history, but I would say that the question of optimism is, I would like to stress the fact that it's for in the ordinary life, the fact that, well, do we need to think of something better? Do we need some hope to think of another life? Is it possible to accept, to admit the life as it is? And I would like to oppose, on one side, this fundamental optimism of many discourses, and perhaps on the side of Nietzsche, a sort of tragic vision of life. Tragic, it doesn't mean pessimistic, because pessimism and optimism, that's exactly the same thing. I mean, that's, well, this sentence, optimism is for the imbécile heureux, the happy idiot, and pessimism is for the unhappy idiot. So that's still for idiots, But anyway, perhaps we say that, but we are all optimistic because we are all hoping in something else and something better.
Well, who would we be without hope? And
yes, well,
yeah, so it's a hope.
is it possible to live without hope? That's one. That's a question.
Sure.
Usually not for very long.
Hope is typically
to the bottom of everything.
Yeah.
hope is typically a response to a situation over which we have no agency.
Or at least
We have hope.
Let me think about that. So we have in a situation where we have no agency, so we have hope.
Yeah.
Why do you mean?
Well, I mean, you have hope about something that you can't control.
Okay.
You wouldn't need hope if you could just do it.
Okay.
And it'd just be expectation.
I would say Nietzsche would not believe that you need hope.
Sorry?
I agree with you.
I think Nietzsche would believe that you don't need hope.
I agree with you. I think you're right.
You would say?
I would say that he would say you do not need hope.
Because it's a false hope and a false idol.
But, I mean, isn't there a certain sense in which, like, not having any hope, not having any hope is pure dissolution. When you go back to Rousseau, like, what separates us from animals? It's imagination. It's the fact that, like, we can...
But you can create and make and not have hope.
But
No. It's not that we can create and make. It's that we can imagine something better.
What's the difference? Yeah, dreaming versus hope, or how hope is.
So perhaps we have to make the distinction between the becoming and the hope.
Right.
Because in the becoming, you can have it in an agency, but the hope is just hoping for some help from.
yeah, hope is just wishing for something without action.
Yes,
It's wishing for something that is not already there.
Yeah.
And the whole kind of going back to the idea of the eternal return is an affirmation of what you have.
Yeah.
You know, so therefore you don't need to hope for something that's not there.
But you said optimism. That's not the same as hope, or is it?
Well, in optimism, you have this idea of hope. No? Or you mean that you are sure that it will be better, that life will be better?
Because optimism seems more delusional? That, like, you're just optimistic, whereas hope actually seems to be about something?
Hope always seems more lofty, whereas optimism, like, you've seen it
It's more
work.
of a stance.
Yeah.
Because you can pray, and praying comes out of misery, so it's not necessarily optimistic.
I think they're very similar. They're similar.
They're similar?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can definitely make a distinction, but they do have very much in common.
Although there's a lot of different forms of prayer, like you can pray in supplication, but you can also pray in affirmation.
But what is? How are we defining prayer? Like, I'm sorry, I really don't know. Like, is it in these other modes of prayer? What is the objective?
Well, I was thinking in forms of prayer, that you would express through things like music or dance. That's more where the function of, the idea of the prayer is to kind of, connect you to, the ecstatic source of the world, but it isn't about trying to control the future. It's about trying to embody the present.
So in that case, it wouldn't be hope.
No.
But there's a certain sort of sense of externality to it, right? That, like, there is something outside.
I hope to be connected to that externality.
Well, no, I mean, I just think the possibility of there being an external something, universal truth, God, the absolute, my paycheck, hopefully, in the bank tomorrow.
Here's money dance, come on.
That will arrive, at least in part. And that seems to become the through line through optimism and hope, right? That some benefit can come to me external of myself. And I think in that sense Nietzsche would say no. I totally agree. But can you face life without that imposition of a supposed externality? I mean, because you can't get outside of your life. But we always seem to try. I mean, through all these various means. I mean, abstract language just seems to kind of be the most egregious in a certain way. But where do you stand? Where do you stand to face life?
could we talk about resilience, please? The fact that there is always a possibility to go beyond very hard situation.
Yeah.
You know? Because this term of resilience is very now, I would say, fashionable, you know? Especially inside some psychological situation. And, well, so, what is resilience? Does it come from the capacity of some people to go beyond some terrible situations, or is it a way to teach resilience? Is it only a discourse, a way for, you know, telling to the others, well, you can make it, don't give up, you'll see, that will be better. I'm sure that the life will be better. It's a terrible moment for you. You lost all your friends or your family, but don't worry. Trust me. I'm sure that it will be better.
Well, how do I know that it would be better? Have you gone through exactly? Also, yeah. I mean, it's because I think that. No, I'm serious. I want to know. No, because I think you were talking about two different forms of resiliency, because there are the people that are going through it, and then if you have examples, you know, then that sort of bends itself into an optimism in a way. You know, for the people that are in the middle of whatever is, you know, bringing them down, for lack of a better term, to see that there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think
like the way Jacques said, the light. That's another trait.
Yeah, usually it is. But
I like just accepting it.
But isn't that resilience, knowing that it's always going to come back again?
Well, it may not be in the exact form. It might just be then you.
But you're never gonna reach a point where you've completely recovered.
Yeah, and resilience is like just not choosing suicide.
It's an awful cheerful way to look at it.
So it's very difficult to face.
I'm saying like that's the opposite of optimism, you know, like just not choosing resilience.
Yeah. So yes, Macadam, how could I say, in the name of what, of my experience, that I'm sure that it will be better. You will recover. You know.
Well, in a way, you can look at resiliency as insanity, because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing expecting a different result. So, you know, if you really wanted to sit down and look at it, because you're thinking, oh, okay, well, like take relationships for example. You're in a relationship and then you break up, and then there's that period where you're like, oh, I don't have any hope, and then your best buddy's like, don't worry, get back out there and go have sex with someone that you don't care about. Good friends, by the way. But then you buy into it again. I mean that sounds incredibly pessimistic, but just in terms of thinking of resiliency as insanity, just because you're hoping that it'll be different this time around, because it's with a different person or what have you.
But I think the different is the key, because it will be better. I mean, it's much different than saying, if this is temporary, it will be different. I mean, you can come through something.
Sure.
And I see resilience as, it's not these gradations of, good, bad, better, best, but that it will be different. Everything is temporary.
Okay.
So,
yeah,
this is okay. Yeah.
And this has a nice tie-in with which essay is it, where he talks about why we develop temporality, and we develop the past to be like, okay, we can
use of abuse of history.
take personally for the ego, that we can that all of the stimulus that's like coming at us in the present. We can be like, okay, this is a repetition, this is a repetition, this is a repetition. And we kind of invent a futuricity to be like, oh, well, hopefully these things recur, and hopefully these other things change, right? And this is a nice sense of an inoculation against life, right? That,
yeah. But don't you think that there is a kind of admiration for resilient people?
Yeah.
Because we said that we could say that, wow, they are really courageous, they are brave, you know. Well, they lost everything, their house, everything was burned, and well, they are still alive, and they have this energy for life. That's great, that's an admiration. So I just want to question this admiration and the interest in this kind of admiration. Because is it admirable to be so resilient? For what reason would you feel any admiration for this kind of people? I mean, we could give some example, you know, people, you know, having, you know, escaping from the concentration camp, you know, and say, wow, that's great. It's what strength, you know, and but
it's like a celebration of the human spirit.
But
yeah.
Doesn't it depend on how that resiliency manifests itself? Like, if it's an inoculation against life, like Nick was giving the example. I know it wasn't quite the exact example, but if it's an inoculation against life, then it's in bad faith. Mm-hmm. But if it's life affirming, if it's in accordance with the will to power, right? I mean, this is Nietzsche's terms. If it's based on self-affirmative, you know, if it's the dance of the overman, then yes, resiliency is important. But if it's in bad faith, if it's to erect idols, if it's to, you know, then it becomes problematic. So it depends on how.
Give us more examples of erecting idols and like.
Of erecting idols?
Or like in bad faith. Like what is it in bad faith? Like because I think resiliency in like a bad faith is like who is that? Like I'm curious.
Resiliency. For instance, what are the group that goes door to door that Jehovah's Witnesses, who are that's the spreading of what Nietzsche would call, you know, an idol or a particular organization of lies to inoculate against true immersion and acceptance and affirmation of the world.
You mean you don't believe that Jesus is going to come?
Well, that might be an example. That might be an example. Maybe I shouldn't have used a religious example, but do you kind of see what I mean? Like,
well, but I mean, those are people who are easy to not admire, right? Because they're irritating. I hope no one's here.
They're snappy dressers, but they're very snappy dressers.
But I mean, what is admirable? I mean, like it's like the video we watched the other morning, right? Like this guy dying of pancreatic cancer, and it's admirable that he can look death in the face.
He's the textbook definition of modern day resilience, and it just permeates popular culture because people want to go, like for instance, and see a film, and they don't want to go see a downer film. They want to go be reaffirmed. You know, they want the heroes to make the right choices and to defeat the bad that they're faced with.
But that's completely unrealistic.
No, I like revenge movies.
yeah.
But the good guy wins.
But that's the counterpoint. So yeah, exactly. Perfect example.
My friend's dad was that.
Did we admire Randy's resilience?
Yeah. But even regarding the what you could call the good faith, not the bad faith, but good faith, this kind of life affirmation, I'm not sure that's really what Nietzsche understood as a life affirmation of the power of life. You know? And I also the precision that there is a difference between the appropriation of the world and the power on things, you know, and the power from the self or from, you know, in French we distinguish le pouvoir et la puissance.
Right.
So the puissance is, well, especially in Spinoza, you know, philosophy, but it's where it comes from. So that's not the power to submit everything and to dominate the world and to appropriate the world. That's the expression of the power coming from the life inside, you know, from inside, you know.
That's puissance.
Huh?
That's
puissance, yes, yeah. So, what you said about the life affirmation, I'm not sure that, I think that it could be a sort of happy fairy tale, you know, a happy end to say, well, yes, the life is stronger than everything, and you'll see that's, well, that's great. Life is always...
Hoisted on my own petard. I see what you're saying, yeah. I can see how I might have fallen into what I was just saying.
It could be, you know, this kind of story, this type of story. The affirmation of the power of life, which is also some kind of optimistic vision of because the creation was always reenacting the rebirth, and of course also we could talk about this notion of rebirth, which is also a myth used in philosophy. The fact that we could that there is a rebirth for everyone, and that there are models. So, but you didn't answer really about resilient people.
Well, and what were you going to ask?
Oh no, you brought up the video we watched
Right.
yesterday, and I said, but in the end, did we admire his resilience?
No.
What we were talking about.
Well, and maybe
Admiration.
is that because he's not really affirming life because he's not affirming death, and that he's holding on to life so strongly and being like, okay, the advice I have to give to my progeny, and this isn't for you, this is for my kids, this is for my reinsertion in the gene pool. And you know, maybe there's something kind of Nietzschean about affirming death as that moment at which you just go. And this is something that, I mean, we have no words for, like, linguistically, culturally, like, it's a really difficult concept, right? Because I was thinking about framing when you guys were talking, and, you know, you look at an ecosystem, and I was thinking about movies, like those really bad nature movies, where it's like, oh, the panda bear and her cub, and the panda bear and her cub are beset by, like, wildebeests, and this obviously isn't in the same ecosystem, right? But, you know, and the wildebeests are going to trample the panda cubs, but, like, at the end of the movie, you want to see that the panda cubs, like, grow up to be productive members of panda society.
Because they're cute.
Well, yes, I mean, this is one aspect, but the fact that, like, maybe the mama panda, like, killed, like, 18 wildebeests to get those panda cubs.
Well, because then it gets in perspective, because what happens if there's a film about the wildebeests that are being killed by the pandas?
That's the will to power.
So,
Are they wildebeest cute though?
And it's something we have no way to frame our lives in that way. Like, we're not often like, oh man, like, me feeding myself every day is like enslaving and killing hundreds of people in the third world, you know, right?
Yeah. What was the question?
About resilient people, is it a model? And well, in fact, the main question is the courage would be perhaps facing the non-existence of progress, of hope, of hereafter. You know, there is. Well, that could be the courage, but is it possible to face this life as it is? You know.
I think that, if you do, then that in itself is life affirming.
It is life affirming.
It's almost like a homeopathic remedy.
Yes, in a way.
That's the only way I can sort of deal with it.
But how do you get underneath all the layers of the old style of life affirmation?
You just do.
Of
It's
hoping.
a little bit uncomfortable, but I think once you do, you sort of, like, it's almost like yoga or something, you know, going through uncomfortable poses and breathe through them and just experience it. And then the nuances of life kind of present themselves in other colors and lights, and that's you know, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but
you know, the tragic conception of life, which is Nietzsche's conception, could be written, you know, by Hegel talking about Antigones. He said, well, you have different kind of rights. You know, Antigone is speaking in the name of the superior law of gods and of tradition, and Creon is speaking on behalf of the city, of the social laws. So, but is there a possibility of agreement between them? Not at all. They don't even speak the same language. You know, that's what Lyotard called the différent. The difference between the litige and the différent. To translate that, it's very hard. The litige, you know, there is something, we disagree with something, but, well, we speak the same language, so we could find an agreement.
Litigation is how it's translated in the different... litigation?
Yeah. Litigation.
In the legal sense, yeah.
But between Antigone and Creon, this
fundamental incommensurability.
Different. Incompatibility.
Yeah, like just absolutely fundamentally incommensurable.
Yes,
like
yes, that's...
In order for us to argue, I have to appropriate your language into my language. Like, it's just the first principles are fundamentally at odds.
Yeah. So that's the tragedy. There is no conciliation, there is no agreement, there is no reparation. Nothing can be repaired. So is it possible in the ordinary life to accept that, well, there is no possible reparation, no conciliation, but perhaps we need some storytelling about the possibility of an agreement and to think in terms of litigation, just in terms of litigation. We could think that, well, there is a kind of universal humanity and we could all be friends, or I don't know, any kind of hope in this way. No, I'm just questioning the fact that is it possible to face the non-existence of any progress, any hope? Is it possible? And according to Nietzsche, one of the functions of philosophy is to negate, to deny the truth, the true life as it is. It's to invent some big stories or some languages to make everyone
feel better.
Feel better, and also hoping that something can be, that the problem, all problems could be fixed. I'm not sure that you see about what I mean. Yes. I mean, that's to promote this tragic conception of life, which is, from Nietzsche, something really fighting the usual philosophical discourse.
Yeah.
Philosophy is like any other language in terms of its modes of figuration, and insofar as there's no sort of access to the noumenal, there's no metaphysical...
Okay, dude, you're going to have to leave out the terms.
Yeah, really.
Oh, sorry. There's no... we have no access to a capital T universal truth, you know? Philosophy is just like any other language in that it creates narratives. That's essentially what I'm saying. Like, language always swirls around, yet never permeates the realm of like things in themselves. That's essentially all I'm saying.
Yeah, narratives.
Just like philosophy.
Yeah, narratives. Yes, you wanted to say something.
Oh, I just think opera does the same thing by being able to witness the tragedy of generally the female heroine, even that, and being taken through the path to the finale. We experience a connection and an acceptance of tragedy without there being false optimism or happiness necessarily, but somehow the melodrama communicates to us.
Are characters easier to, what was the question again? Are characters easier to, no, not identify, what's the positive word?
Embody?
No, to like, to, what was your original question?
Philosophy as a language that reifies these.
No, we were talking about admirable. Are characters easier to have admiration for?
Right.
Than people beset by all the like complicated. I mean, because this is the thing about art, right? Is especially narrative art always seems to paint things a certain way, but there isn't, this kind of universalizing that happens like in philosophy, where we're like, oh well, we can watch an opera, we can watch a tragedy and be touched, but life affirmed. Yes. But maybe philosophy goes about that life affirming process in a slightly different way because it is like, no, you can count on this. This is stable footing.
Or even when it's affirming death, it's affirming life.
Mm-hmm. You know that Nietzsche analyzed the ancient tragedies, and he said that from the moment at the end, with Euripides, from the moment psychology involved in the tragedies, and that also you could have could feel some empathy and pity with some characters. That's the end of tragedy. The real tragedy is with Sophocles and so that's and Aeschylus. And when you have just this character who are quite symbols and they are just right, they have no kind of human feelings, and there is no empathy, no sympathy, no antipathy. And even that's the decline of tragedy with Euripides, according to Nietzsche. And with the opera, that's the same analysis by Nietzsche. He said, well, opera, that's for him, that's the summit of art. That's the best art, the opera, because that's both music and theater and anyway. So he said that suddenly with Wagner, it fall down. Why? Because there is a renewal of optimism in Wagner's opera, with a story and also something that happened and also the end. But there is no happy end in opera like in Verdi, the Italian opera. So that's interesting to see that even in this kind of narratives, it distinguishes those which face the tragic situation with no hope, and those which with a narrative, allowing some empathy to hope something better and a happy end, So that's why it's interesting. It's also interesting to understand the connection between philosophy and opera and art. Yeah.
At first, I thought she was saying opera. But then if you think about it,
you were talking about opera. Oh, you were talking about
opera.
Works either way.
It does sort of.
But this is interesting. I mean, to think about Wagner. To think about Wagner is philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Because the sad endings of Wagner are still like the German people will rise again. You know, the great German nation state will become.
Yes.
But you don't get that in Italian opera.
No, not at all.
Finished, right?
Yeah. That's the philosophy of the Wagnerian opera, according to Nietzsche, is the new philosophy for the Reich. Let's say.
What's that quote? There's the bit in Gravity's Rainbow where these two characters are arguing about. It's not opera, but it's Rossini versus Beethoven.
Yes.
He's like, Rossini makes you feel good. Beethoven just makes you feel like invading Poland.
Exactly.
Yes, I remember that. Yes, that's what, yeah. I'm listening to Wagner and me too. Yes, Poland, yeah. So, Nietzsche tried to... So, you wanted to say something?
No.
No. All right. Nietzsche tried to write the history of the truth, and especially in the Christian world. He said that, in fact, Christianism began by affirming the truth of God, but then there's a derivation towards the individuals, so that, how can I say that? The truth is no longer a matter of metaphysical thought, but the truth become a question for the self, and that's why the Christianity invented the confession and the practice of, and they invent the value of the virtue of sincerity. You say sincerity?
Mm-hmm.
Sincerity. It's important to be sincere, to behave in the light of the truth. So there is a practice and a projection of the truth in all the ordinary life. And he has this sort of provocative prediction to say that, in fact, the Christianity will be affected by its own poison and will die, because, in fact, people will finally ask to themselves, what's the meaning of the truth, and what's the will to truth. So he said that the will to truth, once it is conscious of itself, will be the death of the truth. That's the sort of history of the truth in the Christian world. And he said that's our task to make it happen, to question the will to truth. So I would like now to comment a text by Nietzsche in Human, All Too Human, about the lie. That's the 54th aphorism, so-called the lie. I read it. Why do men usually tell the truth in daily life? Certainly not because a God has forbidden lying. Rather, it is because, first, it's more convenient. For lies demand imagination, dissembling, and memory, which is why Swift says that the man who tells a lie seldom perceives the heavy burden he is assuming. Namely, he must invent 20 other lies to make good the first. One lie is not enough. Then, it is because it is advantageous in ordinary circumstances to say directly, I want this, I did that, and so on. That is because the path of obligation and authority is safer than that of cunning. If a child has been raised in complicated domestic circumstances, however, he will employ the lie naturally and will always say instinctively that which corresponds to his interests. A feeling for truth, a distaste for lying in and of itself, is alien to him and inaccessible, and so he lies in complete innocence. That. So, could we comment this text about the lie, the fact that the real courage is not to tell the truth, but to lie. That's the courage.
But in complete innocence doesn't necessarily require courage.
Very important. Yes.
I know, because
oh, because you're courageous?
Oh, you mean you're lying with innocence?
I think, no, I'm kidding.
So you don't really like me?
I don't know if I lie in innocence or not.
Wait, so what, can you read the sentence before the last one? The penultimate?
About the child?
Yeah, the child in Tufton.
If a child has been raised in complicated domestic circumstances, however, he will employ the lie naturally and will always say instinctively that which corresponds to his interests. A feeling for truth, a distaste for lying on and of itself, is alien to him and inaccessible, and so he lies in complete innocence. And you know that for Nietzsche, the figure of the child is so important, and you remember the three metamorphoses. Yes, yes, and the ultimate metamorphosis is the child. The game, the innocent child, playing without taking care of the truth, the meaning.
So it's a sort of...
So may I ask you now if you would consider that it's very courageous to lie, and that the real courage is not the one Foucault was talking about, the courage of truth, but
courage of survival?
the courage of lying.
It depends on the values you use to assess it. It's a semantic thing almost, like how are we defining courage? How are we defining what is the value that we give to
Anyway, the courage is a moral value, Are you courageous? Are you able to tell the truth? Or are you able to lie? Of course, we would say, you are brave if you can tell us the truth. Tell us the truth. But according to Nietzsche, that's so easy, that's so convenient to say the truth. Because, that's...
But there are circumstances that will create a situation where it becomes difficult to tell the truth. So for instance, if I slept with your wife, and you were about to hit me and say, did you sleep with my wife? Then it becomes more difficult. So Nietzsche has just handily not noticing that, right? He's not noticing the situation.
Would it be courageous for you to tell me that you slept with my wife? For what reason would you say that? I'm sure that there is something.
Well, I know why I wouldn't say it.
You would lie in self-interest,
yes,
but you would know, so it wouldn't be innocent.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it wouldn't be innocent. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and you're dismissing the fact that it would necessarily, make things more difficult.
But yeah,
and you have always to question the desire for truth. Always. So, why would you like to tell me that truth? Why? It's not just because you want to be brave to say, I remember you said, is it brave to say, I feel guilty that now I told the truth, so that's your stuff, It's
Weight
not,
off.
Yes, yeah. That's not very courageous.
Is it self-preservation?
Self-preservation to tell the truth?
In that
to
case?
Lie?
No, it's courageous, according to Nietzsche. First of all, because...
In terms, under what circumstances?
No, I mean,
is it courageous? I guess that's what I'm asking. Under what circumstances is it courageous to lie? Or is it courageous to lie all the time?
It demands imagination.
Right?
Because, of course, perhaps, I don't know if you know, perhaps, but if just an example. Yeah. If you lie...
It's every lie.
They're taking out lying, basically.
We're hoping this is going to be good.
You're about to be very frank with us about something.
This is good stuff. Well, if you meet someone in the street and say, well, I have a meeting tonight. I won't be able to attend your lecture. In fact, we have other reason not to attend the lecture. Okay? So if it's a lie, it could be the truth. Okay, no problem. But if it's a lie, I'm sure that somebody would see you or would tell the guy, oh, I saw that he was in the, or I don't know, this this restaurant, or he had no meeting at all,
So it's courageous to lie, you're going to get caught.
No, that was just a small lie, this at lunch, with somebody. Because, well, we are very tight, and it was, unbearable to talk with someone. But we said, well, we have something to do, and then we went out and so on. So, but, if somebody would see something, you would feel obliged to invent another lie, And so you began with this very white lie, and it began a story, a narrative, and so
that's courageous?
It demands imagination.
But it's not innocent, though.
No.
Because, I mean, like, when I think of, and especially, like, with respect to, a child that grows up in difficult circumstances, it's like that kid in the neighborhood that would create, like, I'm getting a hoverboard for Christmas, like, those sorts of, ways, lies that would make them seem more interesting and would also take away the pain that their life is going through. Yeah, almost in a way. But more of like a workable, everyday kind of thing. I mean, that kid that says, the craziest stuff, and you might know that it's not true, but at the same time, you depending upon your level of empathy, you either understand it and sort of almost play along with it, or you try to call him out on his bullshit. So I mean, but that to me seems like an innocent.
Because it's born into them.
Yeah.
Right? They've grown
Well,
up
it's pragmatic. I mean, right? I mean, either case in the Nietzsche aphorism, right? Like, it's pragmatic for most of us to tell the truth because it's easier.
Yeah.
But under certain circumstances, it's easier for this person to
create a totally different
and
reality.
Why? Why is it easier for that person to have to go through all of this trouble of constantly coming up with these lies?
Because the truth would provoke a potentially violent social reaction.
Or a negative.
Meltdown.
Yeah, it is a strongly negative.
I mean, if you have something that the revelation of it is going to make you, is going to cause you to be expelled from the community.
But, I mean, okay.
Like Foucault.
Like, would you guys like me more if I said that, hey, I can get Bruce Springsteen up here to give us a concert? Or like, I know his manager, and he's going to be swinging through Zurich and coming down this way, and, it would be something along those lines.
Benjamin.
I'm sorry.
Benjamin.
I'm just thinking we can compare the courage of lying or courage of telling the truth. Courage of telling the truth, sometimes the truth hurts, so it takes courage. But the lie, if you tell the lie, it might cause hurt too. So maybe, I don't know, what about that? What the cause of your truth or your lie with?
So, should we evaluate the lie from the consequences, from its consequences?
I guess this comes to the corollary of the point that we were just making on Nietzsche, that to be kicked out of society actually wouldn't be all that bad.
All things considered.
Because there's something about accepting your place in the herd that's problematic.
Yeah. But just I'll let you.
I think it's just I think this happens a lot in aphorisms in particular. Is he kind of takes a certain thing and then turns it a certain way, and it's actually just a complication of what is the truth and what's a lie.
You're right.
Yeah, I mean he's just showing that it's not so clear. You know, what a truth or a lie is, and that's actually the beauty in the aphorism. You know, but
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Let me just repeat this sentence, because in fact, well, that's not the promotion for for lie, but that's rather a critique of the truth telling, okay, of the free spokenness. Why is it so advantageous in ordinary circumstances to say directly, I did that, and so on? That is because the path of obligation and authority is safer than that of cunning. So I think that's what is at stake here, is the relationship to obligation, to authority. You know? Telling the truth, it's always to satisfy the authority, even if the authority is myself. Perhaps that's the other self inside me, my super ego. My super ego, that's the others in my mind, you know. So, okay, I tell everything, and now my super ego is happy. That's why it's safer, but that's a kind of alienation, according to Nietzsche. So that's a critique of the, you know, this this courage of truth-telling. It's not courageous at all. There is a sort of narcissistic interest, even if it's a sort of masochistic attitude. But you know that masochistic is also a narcissism. So it's a satisfaction inside my mind to think that, well, I told the truth, I'm brave, it's okay. My superego, my authority, my priest, my father, they're okay with me, you know. So that's why there is no courage at all for Nietzsche, according to Nietzsche, to tell the truth. Yes, you want to?
No.
Okay, so that's not to promote the lie, but that's to question the truth-telling. So do you agree with this critique of the truth-telling? And then we'll talk later about the lie in complete innocence. What is an innocent lie? Steve?
I would just say I agree with it to the extent that what Hamlin pointed out. It's something that problematizes truth, but it's not something that's absolutely true in every situation. Of course, like when taken in a larger context, it's not some sort of theory of how lies are more courageous, but I really think you made a terrific point in what he's trying to do and what the aphorism is trying to do. It's an effect that he's trying to generate.
Yes.
I think that's perfect.
Of course, that to complicate the question, to mix up the truth and the lie. Anyway, the most important is to always question the truth-telling. Never take the truth-telling at the first step, at the first degree. Say, well, okay, truth-telling is well, it's courageous. You know. Always be suspicious regarding the one who is telling the truth and who is also claiming for the truth, who is saying, well, I'll be frank, I'll be honest, I'll tell you the truth. always be suspicious in this situation.
I mean, I definitely get the feeling that, you know, the truth-telling act, now I'll just have a rhetorical guard up. I was like, well, that's boring. How banal. Like, come on, tell me something entertaining. The Earth does appear to be 4.5 billion years old. We're all going to turn into dust. We're terribly important to ourselves, but not to the larger scale grand play of forces and energies in the universe. We can invent fictions, and I guess anything we say that we delineate as the truth is not going to be a complete truth. That's all I have to say.
I just want to say that there are many levels to interrogate the truth. A metaphysical level, also this social level, and also in the language. So it's important to take care of the language. And you know, we are here to talk about the philosophical language, the theoretical language. We are constantly listening to theoretical language. And so involving Nietzsche in these habits of the philosophical language, it's a way to, for you to be aware of this kind of philosopher practicing the abstract language and always, in a way, pretending not to tell the truth, but to tell something regarding the truth, to be true. So that's why it's not only a question of Nietzschean critique, but that's also the way we are all using, in a way, a theoretical discourse, an abstract language, and we have to question it. Thanks to Freud, thanks to Nietzsche, perhaps thanks to Wittgenstein too, even Wittgenstein is more in the philosophical field. But, that's not only a question of philosophy.
I think you made a really good point when you mentioned that there's multiple levels on which we can talk about truth. And the way that you did it was, you said the metaphysical, social, and practical. I was thinking that in terms of
language.
And language, I'm sorry. But that works too, that works just as well. I was thinking that in terms of Kierkegaard's typology between the aesthetic, ethical, and religious. Now ultimately, they're about the same things, but you can think about truth in those ways. So if we think about like the aesthetic in terms of like the practical relations in which he talks about, Nietzsche talks about like necessary lies, right? Like that's an everyday interaction. Ethical lies are the people who will tell you it's important to tell the truth. Those are people you have to question. And then the religious would be that metaphysical capital T universal truth. And that would be the one you definitely have to question. So I thought that was...
So going back to the lie and the courage of lying, I would like also to refer to other texts by Nietzsche regarding this conception of lie, especially in the gay science. He said that in fact the lie could be also considered as a high degree of civilization reached by some population, some people, but of course that's a provocation. But he also wanted to, as we said regarding the different levels of truth and lie, we have to also remember the different sense, different meaning of the word, the Latin word mentire, and it's lying. Because lie, that's to feign, to dissemble, to imitate, to imagine. So there is really a richness of the lie, and we have to think of all the possibility, the opportunities of the possibility of the lie. So that means that, of course, it's not because, as I told you with the metaphor and concept, if we keep the distinction between truth and lie, we stay in this metaphysical world, so for Nietzsche, it would be better to say that the opposite of the truth is not the lie, but the non-truth. What is at stake is to go beyond the opposition between the truth and the lie, to face what is not even truth, not even true, not even false, but to stay in this kind of uncertainty, to accept the ignorance. Would it be possible to live not as an ignorance, but to know that sometimes it's better to act without knowing what we are doing? Of course, it's crazy to say that, especially for a philosopher. But let me also refer to psychoanalysis itself, because you remember I was referring to this discussion between Charcot and Freud regarding the status of the truth. Is it so important to come back to the truth of the childhood to understand what could be the original trauma? As I told you, we could also consider that the trauma is always the narrative. When you ask to some people, "What's your trauma?" or "What happened?" In fact, there is a tendency to adopt a narrative, to explain what we felt, but in the term of the typical narrative of the trauma. It's not to deny that there has been a trauma, okay? Just the fact that there is a sort of suggestion to talk about the trauma in a standard narrative. So that means that what is really important? Is it to understand what's the real trauma, or is it to find the good way to shape or to frame the trauma? And of course, for psychoanalysis, it's important to always try to find out what was the problem. But anyway, could we also sometimes accept to live without knowing the reason for what we are acting like that? It's difficult to say, because you could think that I am supporting a sort of ignorance and against the knowledge, against knowledge. But no, that's more. Let me take an example. It's connecting to psychoanalysis. In Oedipus Rex, Oedipus King, Oedipus Tyrant. What's the translation? Oedipus the King. You have this figure, this mythological figure of the symbolic figure of the Sphinx, and Oedipus had to answer to the Sphinx. So we could say that philosophy is like that, and so also perhaps psychoanalysis is like that. Is to shape the world as an enigma. You have to think of the world as an enigma. Why the world should be an enigma? Why should we think that there is a hidden sense to find? But that's the narrative for philosophy, to transform the world as an enigma. There is also an expression in French to say that I will tell you in French, sous prétexte d'avoir trouvé une clé, on transforme le monde en serrure. I mean, if you think that you found a key, so then you want to shape the world as a lock, you know. But the lock was not there before. It's just because you are thinking of a key that you want to open everything in the world and to transform anything in the shape of a lock, you know. You would like to open everything, but nothing is closed. But you imagine that there are so many things closed, and you could, thanks to your mind or your intelligence, to open them, you know. So that's perhaps the narrative of the philosophy, and also this kind of delirium that everything should be interpreted, you know, interpretation for everything. The fact that you feel obliged to say, well, I'm sure that there is a hidden meaning, that there is something under the level, that or behind that expression, always wanting to interpret and to find something hidden, you know. We could say that's a strange attitude, the delirium of interpretation, because there is a sort of presupposition, in a way, a prejudice to think that yes, you could always find the meaning, that it's not clear, that well, that there is always a deepness, and you know, this myth of the deep meaning, the deep sense of things, of the world, you know. Yeah.
In English, there's a saying that if the only tool you ever have is a hammer, all you'll ever see is nails. And the other thing I was going to say really quickly is that Richard Rorty has an amazing quote about this. He's usually accused, this is the response he always gives whenever he's criticized as a relativist, and he says, in order for me to be a relativist, you have to go in with the idea of a very particular presuppositions about truth. Right? So I'm only a relativist insofar as we think about truth in a particular way. And it's very similar to what you're saying. It relates exactly to what you're saying, with the hidden level of meaning. So,
according to Nietzsche, it doesn't matter if a judgment is true or if it's a false judgment. The only thing which matters is that it will promote life or not, you know. So the question of the truth is not the most important.
The only thing that matters is if it promotes life?
If your judgment is a promotion of life, if it will encourage you to admit and to assume
lie
life.
Away. Lie away. Go ahead and lie. I mean, I'm bad.
If it helps to express the life, the power of life from the life, you know, well, it's a good judgment. That's the
or a higher authenticity of existence.
Yes, the good evaluation, you know, if you want to really to build a scale for evaluation, the good judgments, that's not at all based on the truth. It's promoting the life, encouraging the life.
You can see this in good arts a lot.
Sorry?
You can see this in good arts work a lot, I feel like films, like his films, it kind of comes into the lie. I'm not going to give you more examples, but that immediately just occurred to me.
So, of course, Nietzsche critiqued the philosopher who presented to have the truth and to interpret the truth, and especially those who claim for the sincerity or the authenticity. In fact, they always hide themselves behind objective reason, universal reason, but the only courage for Nietzsche, that's in his book Beyond Good and Evil, he said, well, the only courage would be to admit the lie, also the ignorance of the reason for when we are acting in such way. So you can say that, well, we went beyond this opposition between truth and lie to admit that it's always a sort of confusing narrative where the personal interest allow us to pretend to tell the truth. I just want to for the last reference by Nietzsche quotes these sentences from Beyond Good and Evil. They are all advocates who do not wish to be regarded as such, generally as defenders also of their prejudices, which they dub truth, and very far from having the conscience which bravely admits this to itself, very far from having the good taste of the courage which goes so far as to let this be understood, perhaps to warn friend or foe, or in cheerful confidence and self-ridicule.